So people are starting to see that there are cracks in the foundation of a 7-year pre-tribulation eschatology. The cracks in the foundation are showing because people are realizing we're running out of room for the fig tree generation, to that generation that's going to see all these things before the return of Christ, things including the rapture. So they're starting to tweak calendars and tweak feast days and keep moving the goalposts. I had a timeline that I did in 2017 that I thought was pretty airtight because I was using a 7-year tribulation span, and I was actually working the timeline backward from a feast day that I thought the Lord could return. So I would just pick a year, find the Day of Atonement in that year, count back 1,260 days, arrive at the abomination of desolation, and then count back from that 1,290 days. And I was looking for a feast day that would take place 1,290 days after this supposed abomination of desolation date. And in 2017, I realized the Feast of Trumpets, which happened to be the Revelation 12 sign that same day, which happened to be Israel's 70th anniversary year from 47-48. Remember, the Jews do their new year in the fall. Their civil new year is in the fall. That's when they change their calendar. So the UN resolution and Israel declaring their independence in 1948 actually happened over the same Hebrew year. Okay. And so anyway, there's 1,290 days from the Revelation 12 sign to the abomination of desolation date, and then 1,260 days from that abomination date to the Day of Atonement in 2024. Okay, this was a perfect 2550 day interval. It was perfect. I searched back in time to find a perfect 2550 day count between a Feast of Trumpets to a Day of Atonement, and this was the only interval of years where you could find that. So to me, it all seemed very airtight. If you took some of the day counts and month counts and so on in the book of Revelation, you would end up on significant feast days, which that to me was just an added plus. So I did videos and put out this hypothesis that I had, and I was very, very convinced of it because it was very, very airtight as far as all that goes, including with the Revelation 12 sign. So I was, thinking 7-year tribulation was that, yeah, that's something that happens, and we're going to have a rapture, not at the beginning of this 7-year period of time, but somewhere just before, like about 6 months before whatever that abomination date was. Part of the reason I was doing a 7-year tribulation was because from my understanding, the two witnesses are the people who are going to build the temple that's going to be around during the tribulation. So I thought, well, they're going to need some time to do that. So all this makes sense that this would be happening. And if you did the 1,335 days from Daniel 12, you would end up at Hanukkah. Okay, so there was all these feast days associated with the day counts, which all made this seem very airtight to me. So when we're not raptured in 2020, which actually I knew things would have to get bad, like really bad, before our rapture. Things weren't quite getting bad enough or fast enough. Things were not as bad as they needed to be. So as we're getting closer and closer to the fall of 2020, I'm starting to get a little nervous because I'm going, you know what, this may not be as airtight as I thought. And then, I do my little try to fill the dike, get the cracks, the holes filled in, and, then 2020 comes and goes, and yes, we're still here. So I actually had an opportunity to test my hypothesis. Okay, I actually had an opportunity to do that, and I had enough time to go back to the drawing board. But because I had learned so much about feast days, and there was just so much that I had learned and actually learned from the book of Revelation about the order of events, how things would play out, the order of them. And by the way, I haven't really changed the order of events. The timing has changed, but the order is the same, because what we've got here is a template. So this period of time could fit into any group of years, from the Revelation 12 sign up until the second coming of Christ being in 2028. All right, so that's how this template could go. So one of the things that I studied first was the temples of God. I'm like, is there something I don't know about the temples that I need to learn about? Because in my mind, we still needed the two witnesses to build a temple, and if we had to put up a brick and mortar temple, and we needed the Temple Mount and all this, that, and the other thing, then we needed time. Okay, we needed time for that. But when I was doing the Temples of God video series, and I highly recommend it, it's a really good study, I think. I realized there was this one temple that nobody talks about, and that's the Tabernacle of David, which is basically just the Holy of Holies. It's the Holy of Holies with the Ark, and it travels. It can go anywhere. Okay, so the Levites would carry it, and David had it brought into Jerusalem, and basically he made God his next door neighbor. The Tabernacle of David was, within walking distance, I would assume, of where David had his palace. So when Solomon built his temple, eventually the ark went into Solomon's temple. But there was this whole period of time where the ark was not in the tabernacle of Moses. It was separated out. That is, God's presence was not in the tabernacle of Moses, even though they kept doing the sacrifices and rituals and so on. When they went into the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement to pour the blood of the sacrifices or put it on the ark, they just had to pour it on the ground because there was no ark there. Okay, and in fact, the same thing is true about the second temple. They didn't have the ark either. Jeremiah had hidden it. According to tradition, it was hidden away. So when Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians came in, they couldn't get it. But it wasn't found, so the people who built the second temple never had an ark there either. So they did all these rituals without the Ark of the Covenant being in the innermost Holy of Holies of the temple. So I realized that the Tabernacle of David is just a tent. And if you know where the Ark is, you can erect a tent and put the Ark in there. And now you've got the Tabernacle of David, which is a temple. It's the place where God resides. And when you read about John being told to measure the temple in Revelation 11, he measures the temple, he counts the people who worship there, and he measures an altar. But it's not the altar of burnt offering. It's the same altar you see in the heavenly temple, which the earthly temple is a reflection of the heavenly temple, which is worshipers in the presence of God with a golden altar of incense. So that's exactly what you see in Revelation 11. You see worshipers in God's presence with a golden altar. So I realized, we don't need 3.5 years before the abomination of desolation in order to build a temple. That can be set up in a day. Okay. And then I started asking some more questions. The next big question I asked, though, is, okay, people say there's a 7-year tribulation. Is there really a 7-year tribulation? Where do they get that? Where's the verse? I've been studying the Bible for years and years and years. I've read the Bible through many times, and I've never come across any passage which says that there's 7 years of tribulation, whatever that means. People equate it with the day of the Lord and the wrath of God. And what I found out later was there's no verses of any kind that say there's 7 years of persecution, 7 years of the wrath of God, 7 years of Jacob's trouble. There's nothing that says that, okay? And so I'm doing all this research, and I'm going to people, to websites and articles where people who have doctorates, people who are, smart people, and I'm like, okay, well, they'll be able to tell me where this stuff is. And what they said was they get it from the 70th week of Daniel. Okay, and they say that that's equal to the 7-year tribulation. And that was kind of popularized, back in the late 1800s by a guy named Sir Robert Anderson, who wrote a book, The Coming Prince, and so that sort of became part of Holy Writ as far as pre-tribulation rapturists go, although they don't realize that a lot of it is attributed to him, because people use his stuff, but they never say where they got it from. Anyway, people who should know better, people who can read Hebrew and Greek and so on, they said there is no passage that talks about it, but it's inferred from Daniel 9:27. Okay, so then I'm like, okay, well, that's what I need to look at then. I need to do my own study. I need to be a good Berean. I need to do my own work on this and see if that is indeed the case, if we can make a case for 7 years of tribulation from the 70th week of Daniel, Daniel 9:27. So what I found was that no, you can't. Number one, the grammar does not allow for it. Okay, the grammar does not allow for the he will confirm or strengthen a covenant. It does not refer back to a people of a prince who is to come. It doesn't refer back to the prince, okay, and the prince of the coming prince of Sir Robert Anderson's book. The grammar doesn't support it, and partially it's due to a bad translation. Everybody's Bible says the people of the prince who is to come, when really the definite article isn't there. Okay, it's an indefinite article. It's a people of a prince to come. It's not a specific, particular prince. It's one, just a random guy who's going to show up with his army and destroy the city and the sanctuary. The he, which is it's a pronoun. It needs to refer back to the antecedent. Okay, in this case, it's the Messiah, the Prince. Okay, I'm going to leave a link to a discussion of the grammar from somebody who reads Hebrew and will tell you how the grammar is structured, so that you cannot make the prince, the people of the prince, which actually a prince who is to come. You cannot take the he who confirms a covenant and turn that into the Antichrist. Okay, huge leaps are being made here, huge leaps. And if the he who confirmed the covenant is actually the Messiah, then we know the Messiah is going to confirm a full 7 years. Okay, that 7 years is actually divided into two, because we know that in the midst of the week, in the middle of the week, the Messiah will put an end to sacrifice and offering. I've done many videos on that, and we know that he ended sacrifice and offering. He put it to rest through his death on the cross. Okay, so here I am. I'm starting to see we've got huge cracks in the whole idea of a 7-year tribulation, and in fact, what I'm seeing is that you shouldn't be basing anything. You shouldn't be basing 7 years of wrath. You shouldn't be basing 7 years of Jacob's trouble, which that's a passage from Jeremiah. Jeremiah never says it's 7 years, okay? And in fact, many other passages say it's 3.5 years. So when we go to Daniel 12, when Daniel asks, how long will this be when Israel has its worst time ever? The man raises his right hand and he says it'll be for a time, times and half a time. That's 3.5 years. In Daniel chapter 7, speaking of this person that we know of as the Antichrist, this beast, he shall speak words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the law, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, 2 times and half a time. But the court will sit in judgment. His dominion will be taken away, to be consumed and destroyed in the end. And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, and their kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom. So this is talking about that last 3.5 years, okay? The book of Revelation tells us that the beast is going to reign for 42 months. Revelation 11 tells us the holy city will be trampled for 42 months, 3.5 years, 3.5 years, 3.5 years. It's all 3.5 years of tribulation for Israel. Then Jesus says in Matthew 24:15, and he's speaking about the end times. The disciples wanted to know, when was Jesus going to erect the millennial temple, okay, the temple of Ezekiel? when all these stones would be cast down of that present temple. And the disciples knew Jesus was not keen on those religious leaders and that temple. He'd cleansed the temple already. And, so when Jesus says there's not going to be one stone left upon another, the disciples are going, well, hooray, let's get rid of that. Let's bring in the kingdom. Let's usher in that millennial temple, the reign of Christ. And so they're wondering, when is this stuff going to happen? They weren't asking about when are the Romans going to destroy our temple in 70 AD. They had no idea that that was going to happen. So Jesus says that before the kingdom can be set up, before his millennial reign can be set up, there are things that are going to happen. One of the big clues, there's actually a sign when the kingdom is about ready to be set up. That's the sixth seal events that we read about in Matthew 24. The sun goes dark, the moon turns to blood. Okay, and that is after the tribulation of those days, after the abomination of desolation. We know exactly when the day of the Lord is going to start. We know exactly when the millennial reign is going to start. We know the sign for that anyway. And we know the window. It's after the abomination of desolation, but before the second coming of Christ. Okay, so sometime during the 1,260 days between the abomination and the second coming of Christ, that sixth seal is going to take place. The sun will go dark, the moon will turn to blood. That'll be the sign that the kingdom of God is being ushered in. The day of the Lord, the millennial reign of Christ is coming. Okay. But what Jesus said to the people who are listening, he says, when you see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, or standing where it ought not to, as spoken of by Daniel the prophet, let the reader understand. Jesus is saying, go back to Daniel. What did Daniel say about this? Okay. What Daniel said about it is the stuff that we read in the second half of Daniel 9:27, okay, after the and, okay, after he will confirm a covenant for 7 years, and in the midst of the week he'll put an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, okay. That's the Antichrist who's coming. He isn't quite, he is the Antichrist. That's the Antichrist, the abomination. And it's 3.5 years, okay. 3.5 years of very great trouble for the Jews. That's exactly what all those other passages are telling us. It's 3.5 years for the Jews. There aren't 7 years left. There's only 3.5 years for Israel. Okay, so where does that put us then? How do we figure out where we can understand how the end times are going to play out, where we're raptured and so on? Okay, well, we work backward, just the way I started out doing this stuff. But I'm not going to talk about that right this minute. What I'm saying is that I saw the cracks in my foundation. I had an opportunity to test my theory early on, and I found that theory didn't hold water. Okay, and it didn't hold water for the two main reasons. One is kind of a corollary, but the main reason was there's no such thing as a 7-year tribulation, which equals the wrath of God, equals Jacob's trouble, all of that. There's no such thing. There aren't 7 years of tribulation. Israel has 3.5 years of tribulation. 3.5 years. Some of Israel will be in the wilderness for 1,260 days. They're the ones who are going to follow Christ when he comes like lightning flashes from the east to the west, when he steps down on the Mount of Olives and splits the mountain, and the remnant passes through that opening in the Mount of Olives, and then the Mount of Olives closes up on that army that's pursuing them. But the rest of Israel some of them will be led captive, some of them will be killed. It'll be a time of terrible, terrible trial for the people who aren't in the wilderness, the people of Israel who aren't in the wilderness with Christ. That's, that's a large part of what Matthew 24 is talking about. Also Luke 21, when you see armies surrounding Jerusalem. It doesn't say when you see an army, or when you see a Roman army. It says when you see armies, that is, nations bring their armies to Jerusalem to battle against the city there. They bring them to Jerusalem. And half of the city will go into exile. Oh, they'll follow the Lord, and the other half will be, they'll be trapped. They'll be trapped there, and they'll become the spoils of war for the nations. Okay, so there are cracks in the pre-tribulation eschatology. They're already showing. Okay, they're already showing. Now there are people who will say, "Oh, the fig tree generation isn't a thing. The Revelation 12 sign isn't a thing. Don't worry about that." People who say, well, the rapture could happen at any time. But on the other hand, they're seeing all the stuff that's associated with the reign of the beast and the seals and all this stuff coming closer and closer. And they're saying, well, the tribulation is casting its shadow. Well, yeah, you bet it is. It is casting its shadow because, get out of the sun here, because it's almost here. The 3.5-year reign of the beast is almost here. Okay, so if we're raptured this fall, the abomination of desolation will happen in 2024. Okay, if we're not raptured till 2024, the abomination is in 2025. The same day that the abomination of desolation happens, the same day the woman flees into the wilderness. That's how we make the connection in Revelation, because Revelation never talks about the abomination of desolation. It only talks about when the woman flees into the wilderness, and we know the woman fleeing into the wilderness is connected with the abomination of desolation. Okay, we also know that on that very same day, the two witnesses are going to rise from the dead and go into heaven. That very same day, there is the second woe, which lasts 1 hour. It's 1 hour on a day, month, and year, predetermined by God. Okay, the second woe is that hour. Okay, in a single hour, 1/3 of the earth's population will be killed. Okay, that's when the harlot is destroyed. The harlot is this system that sits on all the nations of the world. The harlot is not a country. The harlot is a supranational organization of elites who tell us what to do. Okay, tell the whole world what to do. They control the whole world. They control presidents and kings and so on. Okay, the harlot is not the Catholic Church. It's not America. It's not New York. The harlot sits on many waters. She is worldwide, and she controls everything from certain capitals in predominantly European nations and also in America. So there are places where this harlot is sort of situated, but she controls everything from many locations, from Davos and, from London, from Washington, D.C., so on. That's the harlot. So what Satan wants us to do is to always think in terms of black and white, good and bad, yes or no, and not to explore the area in the middle. So he wants people to either think that the 7 years of Daniel's 70th week is all future, an Antichrist confirming a covenant and so on and so forth, or he wants us to think it's all in the past, that Jesus confirmed the covenant, he died, and then the city was destroyed in 70 AD, and I don't know how they fit 7 years in there. They get the stoning of Stephen, but I don't know how that brings in everlasting righteousness or anything like that. So, but anyway, people tap dance all around that to try to make the 70th week of Daniel be all something that happened in the past. It's already fulfilled. Well, it's not. What Satan doesn't want you to see is that the first half was fulfilled by Christ. The last half will be filled at the end. During the time of the end, just the 3.5 years prior to when he sets up his kingdom, his millennial reign. So there's a lot of cracks showing in that 7-year tribulation theory. Unfortunately, events will overtake us, and many of these people will never get an opportunity to rethink their position. It'll just be what it is. My study in earnest, end times, began in February 13th of 2017. Okay, that's when I began my serious study in the book of Revelation. I remember that. So I've had 6 years that I've devoted to this, and it's been what I've been eating, drinking, sleeping, thinking about for 6 years. Now you have to realize people who are pastors, people who are, do this for a living, they don't have the time that I have to do it. And they don't have the ability to make that investment. So they keep on keeping on with whatever it was they were taught in seminary, Bible college, and they don't really have the opportunity. They don't really have they're not going to have the time that it takes to be able to do what I've done. It took me 6 years to do it. And I'm not a novice in this. I'm not a novice in Bible study. Okay, this is something I've been doing for 40 years. So if you've been following my videos, you've been able to watch a process, and you already have seen with me where the cracks in this foundation are located. And it's not just the pre-trib people either, because post-trib people believe in a 7-year tribulation. They just put resurrection and rapture and all of that at the end of it. And then there are people who believe in a mid-trib rapture. And I think what they do is they place the 6th seal at the time of the abomination of desolation. But they still have 7 years. And they still have a 7-year tribulation. That's non-existent. It doesn't exist. It's not biblical. There's no foundation for it. If there was at least one other passage that said there's 7 years of trial, okay, and actually tribulation just means persecution and trial. It has nothing to do with the wrath of God. The wrath of God is something different. If the Bible said there were 7 years of wrath, 7 years of the wrath of God, okay, where it was actually stated somewhere, like these other passages I've showed you where it says time, times, and half a time, and 42 months. There's all kinds of support for 3.5 years of a time of tribulation for the Jews. But there's zero support for 7 years of wrath or tribulation. Okay, all I was looking for was one more verse. One more anything that said something like that, and it doesn't exist. There isn't any support for it. You need 2 verses at least. You need to give me 2. There aren't 2. Going back to the 2 witnesses, right? In my mind, the 2 witnesses needed that full, 3.5 years before the abomination so they could build a temple. Well, then I find out, they're going to be rebuilding the Tabernacle of David. That can be done in a day. Okay, so, what is it about their ministry then? Don't they still have 1,260 days before, plus 3.5 days before the abomination of desolation? And the answer to that is yes, but is that wrath? Is that tribulation? Is that, and do we see that in Daniel 9:27? Is there anything about 2 witnesses there? And the answer to that is no. And so then the question is, can the ministry of the 2 witnesses overlap the time when we're here? And the answer to that is yes. There's no reason why they couldn't. There's no passage that says that they shouldn't. And the second question then is, what exactly is their job? Is it to stand on street corners and blow fire out of their mouth when people are mean to them? No, their job is the Old Testament job of preparing people to receive Christ, preparing people for the Lord. And in their case, they're going to be preparing the 144,000 to come to Christ. And the other group of people that the 2 witnesses need to prepare are the people who are going to be part of the remnant that needs to flee into the wilderness, the foundational group of Israel who's going to be repopulating Israel during the millennium. That is a group of select people that the 2 witnesses will have been working with. And you don't work with people standing on street corners and yelling. You work with people in their homes, in small groups, at the coffee shop, at the restaurant, sitting down one-on-one with people. You do it like Jesus did it. You do it like John the Baptist did it. They're the examples of how do you prepare people to receive the kingdom. You teach the word, you show them the word, you reason with them, and you use, in this case, you'll use Old Testament scriptures. You don't use the New Testament. the two witnesses are not going to use the New Testament. They're going to take the Old Testament scriptures, just like Jesus did on the road to Emmaus when he talked to those two disciples and showed them from the Word of God how these things had to happen, how it was that he needed to die, how he was the fulfillment of the Old Testament passages. And there are Old Testament passages that the two witnesses will be able to use when they're describing the end times just prior to the return of Christ. So both the 144,000 and the remnant of Israel will be ready. They'll be prepared when this end time stuff comes. So do we need to see them doing their ministry? Well, I hope not. We've been watching The Chosen, and one of the things that I appreciate about how they do that video series, and I'm not endorsing it, neither am I not endorsing it. You watch it or don't watch it as as the Lord leads. But the thing that I appreciate about the way they are doing the story of Christ is they show him teaching people away from the crowds. And Jesus talks to people he's healed or whatever, cast demons out of, and he says, don't tell anybody. Why? Because as soon as this gets public, you run out of opportunity to minister privately to the people that you're working with. And in Jesus' case, part of his role at his first coming, it wasn't just to die, it was to teach 12 men enough truth so that they could carry the message on. Okay, so that they could take the message and share it later on. And they had to unlearn all of the traditions that the Jews had placed on them. They had been implanted subliminally and, actively and partially satanically by the people, the religious leaders of their day. Unlearning is really hard, okay? And there are people who will not be able to unlearn a 7-year tribulation. They just won't be able to do that. It just won't fit into how they see things playing out. And you won't be able to reason with them because there's a veil over their eyes so that they can't see it, which is unfortunate. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Thank God I had opportunity. I've had 6 years. 6 years. I've done hundreds of videos. I've written thousands of pages. Okay. I wrote a book. It's over 600 pages. I've written show notes, numerous articles. I've filled up notebooks full of information. I have tons of information. All of this process I've basically put out there for you guys to test it yourself. See if there's any flaws in it. People will bring up things in the comments section that I haven't thought about, and I go, yeah, I need to check that out. You have to be flexible. You have to be willing to change your mind on a dime. If something isn't playing out, if there's no verses for it, if there's no real substantive support for something, let it go. Just let it go and be willing to examine something else. So a while back, maybe it's a month or maybe 2 months ago now, I can't remember how long ago, there was this phenomena circling the internet on YouTube of these sheep going around in circles and other animals that were going around in circles. And I remember thinking at the time, gosh, I've seen this somewhere before. This seems kind of familiar to me, but I couldn't remember where I'd seen this circle thing. I know sheep will do this. It's a phenomena for sheep, and it's part of the reason why they need a shepherd, because if someone doesn't bump them out of their rut, they can starve to death because they keep going around in the same circle and there's no new food there. Okay, they keep trampling on. And they don't venture out. Okay, so they can starve like that. But that wasn't it exactly. And then I woke up the other day and I went, oh, I remember. I had a dream. This is like over 20 years ago now. And I woke up and it was significant to me. I dream a lot. And God has spoken to me in my dreams, and I've shared some of them with y'all. But there haven't been very many of them. I can count on one hand the number of significant dreams that I believe the Lord gave me to communicate something to me, communicate to me personally. And in this dream, there were sheep going around on a road. Okay. And this road actually was circled around a very lush, probably about 2 acres worth of lush green pasture. But the sheep were just going round and round on the road where there wasn't obviously any food. And in my dream, I'm one of these people. And actually it was people, okay? But people and sheep were sort of overlaid each other in my mind. Okay, in the dream, you know how those things work, and I'm doing this with everybody else on the path, and all of a sudden I'm going, I'm not going to do this anymore. Bag this, and I set out into the pasture. Okay, this is a parable, folks. This is a parable. Those sheep are a parable for Christians who keep going round and round on the same worn out path and won't get off of the path into the green pasture because they don't want to leave the group. They don't want to leave the familiar. But I'm going to tell you, you have to, as Jesus told his disciples once upon a time, you have to launch out into the deep. You have to be willing to lose sight of the shore. You have to be willing to leave tradition. You have to be willing to leave your friends to learn something new. You will never, ever learn anything new if you stay on the beaten path. Right. So let my dream be an encouragement to you and a warning as well. If you keep listening to the same thing, you will never learn anything new. You will hope to learn something new. You'll hope to get some more information. You'll hope to know when the rapture's coming. You'll hope to know when this is all going to start. But you will never learn anything new. Guaranteed. I have a huge library of videos. If you don't know where to start, go to the playlist where it says Start Here. And you can start with that particular playlist that I'll be adding to. Check out my Temples of God video series. Check out my boot camp video. Check out my salvation series. I think there's just 3 videos in that salvation series. It's foundational for understanding what I'm doing here. Check out my videos, okay? Then read your Bible and do your own homework, okay? Be a good Berean. Don't be a sloppy Berean. A sloppy Berean is somebody who watches somebody's Bible study or video or listens to their prophecy or their dream and never goes to the Word of God to see if it's true. Okay, they never do their own homework. They just believe what other people say. Don't do that. Do your own homework. I've done mine and I've shared it with you. You do not have to believe anything I say. In fact, you're better off not to believe what I say. You're better off to do your own homework. All right, time is getting short. This is probably why I seem a little emphatic in this video. Time is getting short, and there are people who, if they believe in a 7-year tribulation, and they see us being raptured, and they believe they've got another 3.5 years before the mark of the beast comes, before the reign of the beast happens, they may do something very, very foolish, okay? And part of the reason I'm doing this stuff is not for you, okay, you people who believe in Jesus and are already going to go on the rapture. I'm doing it for people who come after us. So they realize that these things are going to happen really, really, really fast once we're gone. Just like Jesus said, these things will happen quickly. Okay, once the events get underway, they will all happen really fast. Really, really fast. All right, so there you go. There's my video for the day. Leave a comment in the comments section, and we'll see you on another video. Till then, have a blessed day.